Hello, in this tutorial we'll be going over the process of configuring your base rates of your configured chunks. So you can see you have um, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields to fill in. Now we're gonna explain each and every field so that you get a complete understanding of what you're doing here. Now, let's go over for the definitions. Now, the destination field allows you to organize your fees according to a destination that might be local, that might be domestic, cell phone, or international. The country field specifies the country where the calls go to. This defaults to the country you specified when you install Mango Analytics. Now, we need to understand the difference between what you dial on your phone and what your provider receives. For example, in some places, in order to place a call, you need to add a number before the actual phone number you want to call. That's how your PBX knows if you are calling another extension or placing an outside call. So let's suppose I live in Mexico City. If I want to dial my home phone number, which is a 8-digit number, I have to dial 7 plus the 8-digit number. Now, after your PBX knows where to send that call, it needs to transform the number dialed to a form specific to each provider. This is the number that appears in your call record, and this is also the number used by Mango Analytics to assign costs. So, okay, back to the example. I dial 7 plus the 8-digit number of my home, but my provider receives a completely different number. My provider receives a 12-digit number which contains a country code, an area code, and the 8-digit number I dial. So there's a big difference between what you dial on your, let's say, on your office, which in my case is 7 plus the 8-digit number of my home, and what your provider receives, which in my case is a 12-digit number containing country code, area code, and the 8-digit number I dialed on my office. A call prefix is a group of digits chosen so that Mango Analytics know where that call is going. Using our last example, the prefix for all local calls will be the country code and the area code, which is 5255. Now here we have an example. Let's say I want to call my friend who lives in Pasadena, California. His phone number is a 7-digit number, but what my provider receives is a 13-digit number, which contains the country code for the US, the area code of Pasadena, California, and the 7-digit number of my friend. If my provider bills all calls to the US at the same rate, my prefix will be 001, which is the country code of the US. But if my provider bill calls to US depending on where I call, which area I call, then my prefix for calls to Pasadena will be the country code and the area code, which is 001614. Now, the minute fee. The minute fee is how much your provider charges you per minute. Let's say you get billed 50 cents every 15 seconds. Now, because the minute fee is per minute, you have to know how much that amounts to in a minute. In our case, it would be $2. And the billing interval would be 15 seconds because that is the interval at in which your provider bills you. So if your provider bills you by a whole minute, you have to input 60 seconds. But if your provider, I don't know, bills you or charges you every 35 seconds, that you put 35 seconds in the billing interval. If your provider bills you by calls, not by minutes, then you have to leave the minute fee in zeros and input how much your provider charges you for every call you make. But if your provider charges you by minute and by every call you make, then you can put this charge on the call connection fee field. With that out of the way, let's see how we can configure base fees in Mango Analytics. You need to know how each of your provider bills you. Specifically, we need to know how your providers group destinations. For example, your provider may bill you differently according to where you're calling. In my case, I have a fee for local calls, that is calls placed to a number on the same city, and another fee for domestic calls, that is calls placed to another city inside the same country. Now, in Mexico, almost all providers group calls made to the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico in one fee, and all other countries in another. With this information, we may proceed to configure base fees in Mango Analytics. Now, we're gonna start configuring a base fee for local calls only on my trunk ChillUp. Let's see, let's go to Add Base Rates. Click on that. You have your 7 fields you'll need to fill in. Now, because we're configuring a base fee for local calls only, in destination we select local landline, country Mexico, call prefix. Now, if you remember our example, my prefix for local calls would be 5255. The minute fee, let's say I get bill, I don't know, $1 per minute, and I get bill every 60 seconds or every minute, and I don't have a call connection fee. Now let's save the rate. Now here on the right you can see your rates already configured. This is the one we configured not a moment ago, and now I want to configure a base rate for international calls to the US. Now let's see, United States, there we go. Now if my provider bills me the same for every call to the United States, now if you remember our example, my provider receives the calls for the United States like a 12-digit number which contains the country code, the area code, and the 7-digit number I wanted to call. Because I want a base rate for the United States in general, I just add 001, which is the country code of the United States, and let's say I get billed $1.5 per minute, and that's all. Now the call prefix is for Mango Analytics to assign a cost to every call which falls under the prefix. So if you have a call prefix left blank, every call which doesn't fall under these prefixes right here will get billed by the fee you put in here. So let's just put it default tariff. the call prefix, we're gonna leave it blank, and let's put a minute fee of 0.3 of a dollar. Let's save the rates. Now that we have our rates configured, we have to return to the setup and import your PBX data. So I'm gonna importing. Just wait a little bit. There we go. Now we have all our destinations in here and the cost for every destination. Now let's see how our calls got billed. Let's head over to the general cost detail report, and as we can see, if you remember right, on the provider Chillup we added a default base rate of $1. Now, if you remember, for our provider Chillup, we added a base rate for the US of $1.50. Now, as you can see, the calls with the prefix, the calls that matches the prefix got billed accordingly. And if you remember too, we added a default base rate of 30 cents for, and that applies to every call that doesn't fall under any other prefix. So we have here our local calls billed accordingly.